live. This is the fourth Democraciv Constitution meeting. And I seem to be talking to myself. So, I was talking about rescheduling this for a different time, though. It depends on how activity is here.
Yeah, I can't be here for too long today, so but maybe we can do both today and tomorrow.
Well, tomorrow is Monday. I was going to do Tuesday, but we could do something tomorrow as well. I'm all for frequent meetings. Uh, Tomorrow afternoon, I'm busy until. Oh, tomorrow. I might be busy tomorrow.
Yeah, Tuesdays are also fine. So.
Yeah, so Tuesday will be the next meeting. And I'm going to have it later than we've been having it. Going to trying to decide if it's going to be 4 or 5 my time. But after looking at the polls, I found that people seem to be most comfortable with an evening. But I'm trying to find an evening that's workable for people in Europe as well as people in North America and South America. I suppose they can participate too.
I mean, the problem with an American evening is that it's early morning hours in Europe, and
Yeah.
basically most people are asleep.
Right. So trying to find a time that both people, that both are awake and it's uh, the 11 o'clock my time thing was based on me asking several people when they'd be open, and that seemed to be the time that worked for everyone on those days. And delaying it to 1 o'clock was kind of response to that, but that's not late enough. Because I'm thinking that's about 8 o'clock in England, which means that the meetings are going to run until after 10 o'clock. If we hold them later than that, then we're going to be holding the meetings basically around midnight in the UK and later in other parts of Europe. If people are going to be participating, but I think is everyone else busy right now, or you know, is everyone going to be pressed for time here?
I'm good. I'm not busy right now.
Okay, so I guess there's two people who aren't busy. I'm can be busy or not busy. Kind of depends. I got stuff taken care of, so um, I don't have all night. But um, okay, then we are not postponing. Yeah. All right, so my headphones are picking up a weird hum sound. And it quit. Okay. We're good. Go ahead.
Yeah, I will be dropping in and out for the next hour, then I have to leave, so...
Okay. Well, then we'll try and make this like a relatively shorter meeting. Guess the easiest things to talk about is to start with the poll. And then Masenko and I have been working, well, at least we were last night, on a possible constitution draft and on comparing our provincial systems and trying to find a middle ground in them. And so for me, the issue is getting the math to work right, getting the numbers to be consistent. And that's the issue I had with any changes I'm making to my model, is always that number.
And I think another thing we still disagree on, but we'll find some middle ground, is whether to have and I think your point about numbers factors into your opinion on this, but I think we still disagree on whether or not we should have a bicameral or unicameral legislature.
Right. Now, I'm thinking, that was yesterday, and I think my brain does not remember stuff. Came up with with something that worked with your bicameral system and my system by changing the numbers around, but it had to cut the numbers of the ministers down to work. But it came up with the same results as my system did.
Also, I know this will probably infuriate you, but I made some changes today to my proposal. I just kind of went back and looked over some stuff and was considering some options.
Yes, I'm furious. I'm stomping my feet. There's steam coming out of my ears. You can't tell because I have the headset on.
Yeah. I changed a couple things. First, I took what you said and I cut down the number of legislature. Well, first of all, I changed the names because ministry I felt was a little confusing.
It was very confusing.
I thought people were looking at it to, and we can change it again if we need to, but I changed it to first chamber is House of Commons, second chamber is the Senate.
Okay.
More like recognizable to understand what that means.
And the third chamber is Cabal, but we don't talk about it.
Right. But then I changed the number for the House of Commons to, instead of 5 or 15%, it'll be 3 or 10%.
Okay.
I think is what you said last night, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was going to be population based.
The Senate would still be 3, and then for every additional province, but I kept that the same because I was still a little confused on what your thoughts were on that whole thing.
Well, looking over the polls, I found something interesting that I'm trying to figure out how it applies to my proposal. Is I'm looking at first we have 60% of people want the provinces to decide the legislatures, like my model is, where in the U.S. when you go to vote, you vote for just your local representatives. You don't vote. I don't vote for West Virginia. I can't decide if I want to vote out Steve King. I can't do that. Or if I want to vote out Pelosi, I can't do that because I don't live there. I only vote for the local legislators. And that's the kind of system I'm proposing here. And
I feel like the issue with that, at least in my mind, is that there's not really there's not really a locality to anything. Obviously, all space is removed. We're on the internet.
Right.
But also, like dedicating yourself to one city or a collection of 2 or 3 cities, there's not a lot to do there. There's
Really,
not really gonna be a lot to do
it
there.
depends on the culture
Also,
that revolves around it. Anyway, go ahead.
you run into the issue of, for the first 150 turns maybe, we have like 1 to 4 cities. Probably under sometimes. Like, I don't know about Civ 6, I don't know if you expand more with more cities or something. But like
Certainly more to do in Civ 6 when it comes to
Yeah.
an individual
Penalize
city.
you as bad for spreading wide.
Yeah. I do think it works better in Civ 6, mostly because of amenities, so that one city doesn't drag down the rest. You can have that, kind of have that system. But like early game, it's not going to be functional, especially when we only have one city. That's my main.
Yeah.
With any legislature tied provinces.
That's going to be a
If
problem
we had
with
it, so
any
like
provincial model.
yeah, so if you could have it where, well, for example, in Mark II, we started off with mayors, but we got too big to have mayors. We just couldn't have enough. So we split it up into governors with like 3 states.
Right.
If we kind of did that the similar way, where we start off with just a normal everyone elects a legislature,
Yeah.
how we've been doing it for the last 3 Mark,
That's what my
and then
system
once we
is.
grow, that is okay. I haven't had time
Yeah.
to read all the systems, but
My system
I agree.
is
It's
an ideal.
my system is where at the beginning of the game we don't have states. We have one, we just have the capital. And when we have that, we have whoever the executive is. I'll just say president as a placeholder. We have the legislators who are based on the population, and that's all there is. When we get a larger population, when we get a few cities down, people can decide if they want to split into a new city, but only if they want to. And then when numbers start dwindling, we won't have a mandate of, well, we've got 7 cities, we need 7 mayors. We'll just have governors for the cities, and only if there's enough people in the cities to do that.
Mm-hmm.
there's also the ability to scale back
So-
down, right?
Right.
If there's 7 cities, that doesn't
Yeah.
mean they all have to be separate provinces.
They can all be
the
in
same
their own.
exact
They can all be
thing.
in the same state.
Coffee. How many?
We have population issues. Sorry, go
Would
ahead.
you
Will.
have like I'm again, I haven't read your thing. I'm sorry. This might seem like a bad question, but do you have like a set amount of legislatures that are then split across the cities, proportionate to population?
The model that I
How
propose
exactly?
is 1 for every 5 citizens, rounded up.
Rounded up.
Yeah, which means like if there's 4 people in the city, you still get a representative. So
My model is somewhat similar. We're trying to reconcile our models right now, me and Espresso.
Would there be an upper cap on how many people are in the legislature,
no, but that could be
or
put in.
the option to set one? Yeah, because
The
if we
model I
like
have-
8 cities, 10 people. I don't know. I guess it would be.
My model has 2 branches, where one branch is done it before, except slightly smaller. Instead of 5 minimum plus or 15% of the people who voted, it would be 3 or 10. So one branch is just, regardless of provinces, is completely proportional. The other branch has constant province. So it would
cut
not be
off there.
proportional to their.
You missed part of. You said constant, and then you muted.
Okay, so the second branch would be constant, not proportional
Okay.
to their population. They would not be based on population. You'd have the capital with 3 representatives, and the capital province could be literally every single city if we wanted to only have one province. So you'd have like a minimum of 3. So the legislature in total would be, like, if we hit bare minimum people, would be 6 people, 3 per branch. New province that people decide to add to our group, another 2 legislators for that province. And it's not proportional, it's just a constant number of 2 legislators.
Yeah. that's where I started having weird stuff happen when I was doing the tests last night. Is with any of the constant numbers, stuff gets really weird as the population grows and shrinks. It really does work around a specific range.
What were some of the issues you ran into?
Do you have that test sheet that I sent you? 'Cause I don't have.
Yeah, you do.
Could you link that so I can mess with it real quick? Because yeah, that's set up on another account on my
Want me to link that
computer.
on? You want me to link that in the meeting chat?
Yeah, just the calculator thing. Yeah, that's fine. Because what this does, I'm sure it looks like a confusing thing, but what it does is lets you see some different proposals I was working on as a live calculator. And where it says rep old is the system that I proposed. And it allows for 5 states and a capital province. And then the second one is, let's see what the formula for this is. This is what I was proposing as the compromise system.
Or it would be based on population?
Yeah, let me look at what I had written here. So then we have 1 for each province plus 1. So we got 2 representatives for each province plus 4 for the federal, and then the floor of the, instead of rounding up, I round down on the 1/5 population. And so we have 8. How is this? Okay, so that would be 9% of the population would be 8. Okay. So what I'm seeing with this model, and the point of it, what the formula is 1/5 of the population rounded down for legislators. And the fixed numbers are 2 ministers. Now that I think about this,
You thinking when you say ministers, do you mean like second
Senate.
chamber of the
Senate.
legislature? Yeah.
Yeah.
Senate. Okay.
Sorry. We used a
Because
few different terms back and forth on this.
Yeah.
But if you look at the differences here, the old system gave a 20% representation. This proposal gave a 9% representation out of 2 houses.
So 18 total?
Yeah, 18 representatives in my model. In this model, the math worked out to 8.
Wait, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, let me try if I make this ceiling. That's still only going to give 1 more.
That's only with, isn't it?
Well, this is based on the idea of we have 1 province. If we don't expand provinces, this is what it's going to look like. And the problem with the fixed numbers is they get weirder as the population goes up. I'll kind of show you what happens if I scale it up to 500. We're down to 2% representation.
Yeah, except, I mean, I'm kind of under the assumption that as the population goes up, we find more excuses to have provinces, right? Like,
Right.
I feel like would have more provinces as the population goes up.
See.
as opposed to
But
when the population
if-
goes down when we scale
If the
back.
let's say we
population
have
isn't continually
200
interested in
people.
making more,
Say we have 200 people and we split into 4 provinces this way. We're looking at a 7% representation. So that's using the compromise model that I'm trying to figure out. So that's the hard part. Is how do I find a way to keep these numbers? So what I was thinking is take my old proposal and then add a 10% of the population on top of it, which is 30%, which is really high but not so bad. I could also potentially increase the this from the threshold from 5 to 7, and this looks like 14%, 14%. So, yeah, if I change this to 7, it's a fixed 15%. It's a fixed 14% base, which we could then do a 10% of the population of the entire population on top of it, and we would get pretty much a perfect 25% population in legislature.
So quickly go over how you calculate each chamber there.
Okay, well, let's say
just so I can get a big picture.
For my end, can't type.
Hey Angus, I have one question for all you, because again, I haven't been following provinces extremely closely. Changing throughout states, is that like just a one-click you're done thing? Because in Mark III, it was kind of an issue having to like wait for a committee to allow you to move or some dumb shit.
So basically, what I think.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Angus, immigration committee just restricting something that doesn't need to be restricted.
When I'm saying an immigration committee, I don't need a committee to confirm your application. I'm more talking about a committee to say, hey, that's formatted correctly, put it in the spreadsheet, so that we're not having to do anything with technology that ends up in some weird Google form thing.
Yeah, instead of having a committee, we could just have a Google form where it's like,
well, my idea
moves, or we just have the election where you vote wherever you want in the election.
That's fair. Then I don't want to be burdening it on moderation to figure out which address is valid and chasing that down.
So
no, like during the election, you would as probably the first thing we did
during the election. People
vote on one.
People would just vote on one ballot, except those people who didn't. And then the mods would get involved and have to look into it and figure out which vote they want to be valid. And
what do you mean?
People. Well, so.
Let Espresso talk, as he knows what he's saying.
Okay, well, because I had my idea is that it's just one form that anyone can submit at any time. We'll use the PIN for validation. And you just say, I want to move to this city. And you can fill that out anytime, as often as you like. And on a certain day, probably candidacy announcements will lock down what everyone's residency is at that time, which isn't too hard to set a date on the sheet to filter out anything after that date. And then that's the city you live in, whatever you've declared last on that day, and that's what's used to determine the numbers, the population. And then nobody has to review it. We don't have to have a committee over it. We don't have to really have anything. We don't have to have moderators looking over it. We don't have to have anything to really fill out other than the form, which is and the spreadsheet connected to it will be automatic.
So once again, I'm still a little confused on the whole thing you're writing here in the test.
On the test.
Over.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is well, because it's formatted bad, because it's just a calculator that I was throwing together to work with. All right. So there's 2 houses here, and okay, for every province. For every province, there is one. I'll use the term Congress and Senate, just because that's easier to remember. So for Congress, you get 1 for every 7 people in a city. So we'll have 6 people equals 1, 15 people equals 3, and just say 63 equals 9, I believe. So these examples here are how many legislators each province will provide to the assembly, to the Congress. And this is what will make up the first house. The second house will simply be 10%. And so let's say the population that I just gave in this example is so 81, so we would have 8, I would say, I don't know if we should round that down, round it up, or round it evenly, but let's say we have 8 senators. And so that would give us whereas this is going to be, let's see, 13. Well, we get 16% local representation and 10%. So that'll be 26% representation. 26% of the active members are going to be legislators in some way.
Okay, I understand that, and honestly I think that's pretty good. I'd be amenable to that for my own proposal. I mean, we should probably switch the names around. House should be the 10%. Well, it's the Senate should be like the regional one, in my opinion.
2 new names.
Yeah, we can use another name. My issue with a bicameral system at all is, what do they do?
Yeah, what's the difference?
The thing I had with your proposal is you had 2 houses that were both alike in dignity, and the thing about it is they could both propose anything they wanted, they could vote on whatever they wanted, they just had to pass it to the other house to do the same thing. But we've had a lot of issues with legislature to begin with being bogged down or being having issues with just one legislator. I
can see it as a plus mostly in the fact we're taking away executive veto. So, like, if a bad bill is passed, there's still another step to take it back or something. But
we're taking away executive veto?
Yeah, so that is kind of the thing is, it sounds like you're turning the executive into a legislative branch. That there really isn't much left for an executive to do.
Yeah. I mean, it is a good substitution for the...
Well, I mean, you're asking me all these questions, but do you want me to respond to them? Or?
Yes.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah.
So, I guess, in my mind, I don't see them as a second executive. I see... in my proposal, I am sort of married to the idea of a single head of state.
That's my preference as well. But
they have 2 defined powers. Well, 3 specific. 1 is general. The 2 specific powers are they control units that deal damage, and they can conduct diplomacy, except for the act of declaring war or declaring peace. those things are left to the legislature. Those two things I feel require a lot of nuance when playing, and it's not something that the legislature can exactly. So I think that should be left to an executive. Then the third power, a sort of general power, is applying the law. That is, they're sort of the main interpreter of how the law is applied to the game, and they're supposed to execute on the legislature's will. In my opinion, deliberating as to what happens in game should go to the legislature now. We've had in the past we've had a ministry that is like, in the absence of law, kind of play the game however they feel. I personally think that be laws, or at least directives, or at least a plan from the legislature, and how to play the game, how long to play the game, all those things. I feel like most of the power should be concentrated in the legislature for a lot of the reasons that I mentioned in my post. And because I just see the legislature as a more robust branch.
Yeah. I think one issue looking at your system, since you lack governors and stuff, there's going to be a lot of stuff the legislature has to do. They have to run every single city. They have to move all the workers because only military units.
I mean, I guess that's a question for the future.
And
I agree.
So either they leave a lot up to be done to the chancellor, which is now one person instead of 5, isn't politically representative of the entire community. It's one majority, or will be a compromise majority, but still. But it's going to be a lot of work on the legislature, like a lot more than they've ever had.
You're right. I also imagine those things will be dealt with over time. I'm sure that the legislature will.
My issue with that is, it's just kind of idealistic and leaving it up for the future when we should probably be handling it now.
Don't necessarily agree. I mean,
put it into the future.
I would rather see certain crises averted in advance.
Yeah.
Rather than some drama of
it feels like kind of setting us up for.
I kind of disagree, because I feel there were some merits to the sort of minimalist constitution ideas that we had from Mark IV. I think certain things should be defined, obviously.
Yeah, I think the main issue with the minimalist constitution was that it started by allowing the executive to do whatever they wanted. The legislature would presumably do something, like they would rein them in a lot. But they never really did. They did minor things, but they never did full scale. And I think that's part of the reason why a lot of people were angry at these things.
Really much of anything, so yeah, anyone could do what they want till they were called out on it. But legislature always had power that they never made use of.
The legislature never used their power to the full extent or even a minor.
Well, this proposal eliminates some of those issues by not having the executive just have free reign right away, and forcing the legislature to sit down and make those kinds of laws to run. And I think a lot of the fun of being in the legislature is figuring out how to do that, right? You had a problem before you that is, okay, we have a lot of stuff to do in game. There's a lot of things on the table. How do we set up systems to do this?
That's very fun for a bureaucrat, and I would definitely agree. I've written a lot of bills that are just fun to write. But not everyone wants to be a bureaucrat, and in your system, we have one person that isn't a bureaucrat. Everyone else is a legislature, and they are. So
I think part of this, part of the natural, perhaps other legislators would disagree with me on this, but part of the natural conclusion here is to start delegating some of that power to the people of the states that they're part of, allow them to make some of the decisions so that the legislature doesn't have to sit there and do that every session. I might be wrong. That's just sort of, I have a mentality, I guess, that is more bureaucratic. do you think there's merit to the system? If you guys, I'd love to hear other proposals. I'm trying to keep as open in mind as I can this time around. Trying to be receptive.
I have a question for Coffee.
Okay.
Reading your proposal, how exactly do you envision the executive functioning during a session?
Well, mostly this proposal was meant to cover legislature and provinces, but ideally I was hoping for a presidential system. But I've been toying with the idea of making a ministry out of the governors, making the governors their own little body. So we would have a chief executive, possibly a vice president at the very top, but for each city they would all be represented by one person for that city, and whether they participate in the stream or not, they don't have to. They would be able to, kind of like we did in Mark II, come up with a list of orders for the city, and if they don't provide that, well, that falls to the rest of the executive. But we would put, you could kind of see it as we would have a ministry made up of governors, with the president being both the governor of the capital and being like a super governor, having final say over anything that is not particularly related to a particular state
City.
goes to federal.
So that does kind of have like a misrepresentation thing, because let's say there's a state with one city and there's like 6 guys in there. They're super dedicated. They love their city and everything.
Right.
But they have one governor. If
Right.
there's a state with 4 cities and 30 people, they also have one governor.
Right.
I also think that's why we need to focus more power into the legislature, right? There needs to just be more power to this branch which is proportional, and they can make the decisions in the game.
I think the governor aspect of it isn't necessarily disproportional. Like the 30 people in 3 cities thing, that's fine. The governor's been elected by them to run their city.
Right.
But if you have a council that's deciding other things, and that person with 30 people behind them versus the person with 6.
I thought of the, maybe I wasn't quite clear, is that the governors are responsible for their own area. So any decisions that, so they would be able to participate in national decisions that involve all the provinces. But
could you give just an example of that? I don't really understand.
Well, I'd say civics would be something that you would need full involvement in. I would rather see legislature involved in the civic system. But
I feel like things with large overarching national
the construction
things
of wonders,
that aren't.
We would definitely want to get everyone to be okay with wonders. We don't want to start building something and say, we didn't get a chance to say we wanted to build it. I would like to see a process where...
We had something like that in Mark III, where if 2 governors wanted to build the same wonder, this was only used once, if I recall, quite early. If 2 governors wanted to build the same wonder, they would dispute and they would actually go to a court, possibly the Supreme Court. I think that is better than just having this whole system of governors writing a thing.
Yeah, well, what if instead of going to court, they just held a vote with a tiebreaker being decided by the president?
That's fair too.
So
that would solve the issue of having to stop the session inside it.
I'm just saying, can I jump in?
Yeah.
I just think that topics that we're going over right now are questions, but I think that the Constitution doesn't necessarily have to answer those questions. I feel like a lot of that can be...
It's more of a question about the issues with the various systems.
Well, I do think
what needs to be addressed.
Needs to address this, because if we're going to do this, it's going to affect the composition of legislature and the executive. And we don't want to be writing an executive that's going to ruin any kind of provincial system. We don't want to come up with a provincial system that'll ruin an executive and legislative system. We need to make sure that these systems are compatible.
I think, honestly, you have the governors running the various cities and states. You have a Masinko-style chancellor / president that does military diplomacy, that sort of stuff. And you have a legislature that does more of the overarching stuff, so tech tree, civics. My issue with tech tree and civics in Civ 6 is that we can get Eurekas, so we kind of have to coordinate the two. Right. Like if we get a Eureka in one thing, we might want to take it before we go off and do a full tech of another, or we gotta wait for the Eureka, which kind of
I had a bit of an idea.
Doing.
Yeah. Well, go ahead with your idea.
And I think I mentioned this last night to you, Coffee. One of my main concerns with the executive is the scheduling issues. I know that you said in a comment to my post, Wes, that same time frame every week and whatnot. I still think that you run into complications, and I think that having to schedule around 5 people or X amount of people in a given time wanting to rush through the game more, which is why I want to reduce the number of people playing the game as much as we can.
I disagree with that.
Well,
I think if you have a set turns per week, it would definitely want to rush it. But if you just have 8 people, I mean, presumably we're not going to have 10 governors.
So one thing,
but if we have like 5 to 8 people, you don't. There's no rushing because you're just doing the same decisions you would. Like,
fair enough.
You still have the week before for the legislature to do everything they need to do.
Right. Here's my thoughts, at least, though. You mentioned earlier that you kind of were like, well, what's the difference between these 2 chambers of the legislature?
Yeah.
What if one chamber is made up of pseudo governors? What if one chamber was just a bunch of people either proportionally elected or elected, one per province or whatever, and they're just given specific powers that aren't necessarily encompassing powers, but powers that specifically relate to the states, specifically relate to the provinces.
The collection of governors would vote on state-specific issues. What did you say?
Any state-specific issues would have to go through them. They might still be able to, production, citizen placement, where to put the district.
You have a system that has a focus on electing a local candidate to run your thing, but then some guy from the capital is also voting on your city now. Like, that kind of backsteps away from the locality that an espresso system that he's trying to.
Yeah.
I guess.
Another, one approach I'm trying to take is to make this as non-confusing to new players. Even, I think it could be really complicated and interesting in the background, but as long as someone can just look and say, how I want to see it is, say I'm new to Democraciv. They're like, hey, join. Sign up here. You can pick a city here and vote. And 3 steps, and that's everything for participation. And it can all be spelled out very clearly, and you don't have to explain, well, we need such and such percentage at here, and if you decide something has to go through this committee and this committee, I think that's really off-putting.
I agree.
There was a point I was trying to make, and now my mind just went blank on it. But it had to do with the governors, and I don't think anything that a governor should be doing should be sent to a committee. Should be done by a group.
Yeah.
My idea is kind of let the states all have their own laws and their own rules. So the people in that state have full democratic control over what goes on in that state. It's completely up to them what happens. And see, what was my point? I've lost my train of thought here.
I agree with that, and I think that should be the case. The issue is constitutionally, if you want to institute that, you're going to have to list out a bunch of enumerated powers for the states, because in Civ, there are only a finite amount of things and decisions that can be made in the game.
Yeah. Oh, that was my point, was about turn lengths and civics. That's what I was thinking about. But I don't think it has to be that much. You can just spell out that governors have control of, and I was even to the point of saying, I don't think governors should control military units without, but that's debatable. That's
I don't think governors should. I don't think governors should control military units. It's been on and off for a couple marks.
Yeah.
Mark II we had garrisons. Mark III we had like a pseudo garrison that wasn't really
Yeah,
used.
I think we should leave that.
Mark IV we didn't really. It's
with the executive.
not an issue.
But
Yeah. The head executive or the ministry, they don't.
However,
there hasn't formed a personal vendetta where you want
there
barbarians to
should be
invade.
an allowance for, like, we'll say the president can say, okay, this unit here is yours. You, governor of North Carolina, you can control this unit. It's yours. Do what you want with it. At that point, the governor can control a unit because that was power deferred from the president. And then the president can
we
take
had
that
that
back.
in Mark III. It's not a very relevant power, and I think it's probably suited better for another bill.
Yeah. But
Be like,
what I think about having to spell out powers in the Constitution, pretty much just say they have the right to control production and citizen production, tiles, and citizen management. Possibly give them control of any locally made builders.
What do we think of, just in general terms, and this is something that I'm quite in favor of, and
you're cutting out a lot.
I'm sorry. Is this better? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
What do you think of a proposal? Sorry. Scratch that. The idea of having no like mandated turn limits for the executive in the Constitution. What do we think of extending lengths of just elected officials in general?
Extending the lengths of their terms?
Yeah. Oh, one of the things you said in that Reddit post was that since they only have 1 month, they feel like they have to get a lot done. Which I don't know if it's just me because I've been an executive so many times. I've just never felt that pressure. Like a month, that's like 4 sessions. It's like 80 to 100 turns maybe. That's solid.
As it
Like,
stands,
you don't need a lot more for that.
We do one election a month if we had everyone have a 1 turn, a 1 month term, one election per month.
It feels like a solid amount. Like there's plenty of elections going on. There's rotation. Doesn't get too stale.
I feel that 80 to 100 turns in a month.
Not even 80 to 100. It's 60 to 80.
That's what I was going to say.
I still think that's too much.
Was Civ 6's civic and tech systems have always been a concern for me, that so much happens in a short manner of turns, and rather than say, like we did early on in Mark 1 and 2, say we need to have a minimum of such and such turns each week. I'm thinking we should set we should have events end the session. Say like when certain thing happens, the session ends.
So we've had like glimmers of that in the past. For like Mark III, we had like you settle a city, you have to stop.
Yeah.
It often feels like, oh well, that's kind of lame. Let's delay the city for like a turn or two to get this tech done.
Yeah. Well,
like that's not bad, but
if
it's
we set
like
things that are harder to delay, like you can if you want to, but it's pretty much suicide if you want to start delaying your tech and stuff. But say like we end the session when we get a civic. Well, that can happen depending on how your culture goes. That can happen really fast or really.
That can happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then that just that takes that. Yeah, it just feels forced. I would say just like have a maximum you can play, so you're not playing the entire game in one session, but you don't have a minimum. That would be. That seems fair to me.
The solution to this is just simply take away the power of the executive to decide how many turns they play. Give that to the legislature. Let the legislature say, "Hey, executive, your next turn, your next session's gonna last this many turns. You're gonna do these things in this."
So, as like a version of that, you could just have it so that there's time-limited things the executives have. The legislature fully controls. If the legislature fully controls tech, then however much they assign, that's all the executive can do.
I'm thinking, let's leave this out of the Constitution completely. Let's just leave it out of the Constitution. Make this a legislative.
We probably should.
At the start of the game, since legislature won't exist, the ministry can do what they want here, within reason, but legislature should make one of their first priorities, get a law on how to run the game.
Yeah,
and that won't be done by a convention.
My other point...
That'll be done democratically.
I'm sorry. My other point would be that if the legislature says you will play 15 turns, sometimes turns as an executive branch can take 30 minutes each. It can get like stupid like long.
Right.
Especially later game, especially in wars and shit. It can go on forever. If they're legally mandated to play a large or even just more than they can, it's going to be an issue.
Well, then that's a bad law, right? But my point is that executive at the beginning of the game, like my point is that we should pace the executive schedule around the legislative schedule rather than vice versa. We should pace it so that the executive plays around whatever the legislature's doing and passing laws about and
so I think
giving directives about.
That should be done through something like tech or civics, where if the legislature only confirms these two civics, I guess, then that's all the executive can do. If
I'm saying that in the absence of that,
then they're done.
But I'm saying in the absence of legislative guidelines, the executive simply shouldn't play.
Like, that's my point. The legislature guidelines as far as they want, and that's as far as a legislature can play, or the executive can play. They have to stop playing once they've got to a point where they have to.
Honestly, I think one of the problems is that the turn-based numbers is a problem, because in Civ, turn lengths and how long each turn takes, what happens, changes a lot throughout the game. So, you do get times at the end game where a single turn can take an hour to go through.
Oh yeah, the last session was 25 turns.
Yeah.
And it lasted 5 hours.
Yeah. So that, of course, is a concern.
We did, to be fair, restart like 3 times because
I also think it's okay for the legislature. I think it's okay for game sessions to last like, even in the early game, 1 or 2 turns, 3 to 5 turns of just very specific things happening that the legislature can look at, react to, and pass laws and talk about.
If we're having governors and
as an early start, say civics are going to be the cutoff for session length.
Fair. Well, again, it could be whatever the legislature decides at the time. If they approve 5 techs but only 1 civic, then you have the 10 turns it takes to research that civics. If they have 2 techs but 18 civics, vice versa.
What I'm saying is it's very clear what's going to happen.
With the 2-turn session, not a lot happens in 2 turns, and the legislature probably is going to make a 2-turn session. But you also have to get all those governors in, all the executive in, for 20 minutes.
What I know, but what I'm saying is, okay, say that we're about to settle our first city, right?
Mhm.
The legislature can go, for this first, for this first session that you're about to have, Mr. President, we'd like it if you showed us, started the game without ending your turn, show us where the settler is, and now, and then just show us where that is. You don't have to. Maybe you don't even have to stream it. Maybe you just show us the first.
Yeah, okay, so that's a special case,
thing.
and I would probably agree with you there. It's just like if you build a system
But then
around
next turn, they could say, okay, we'd like it if you, okay, now we've decided you're going to settle here. Here's a list of things we'd like you to do. We'd like you to choose these civics. We'd like you to choose this technology. We'd like you to choose the production for the city, unless, of course, there's like a governor for that city, in which case they do that. And we'd like you to do all those things and try to accomplish these things. If anything happens within that time that is outside these plans, the game, so that we can deliberate on it.
That's fair.
And if that's 2 turns, if that's 5 turns, if that's 10 turns, so be it. But I don't think that
I'm thinking.
I'm really just arguing against like specific turn.
At this point,
That's what
after
I'm
this discussion, I'm thinking we need to leave this out of the Constitution completely because it's clear this is something that needs to be done dynamically and can be done through legislature. So the best thing to do is just we leave it alone because I can't really see that there's anything that needs to be constitutionally mandated in here. So we probably need to move on to another topic then. Not that this wasn't a good discussion, because that's kind of how I came to this conclusion. This does not need to be constitutional.
One more thing, if I can, just as a final point. My constitution that I proposed doesn't define these things, but it does say that the executive is responsible for implementing the law, legislature, and will stream the game when doing so.
Mm-hmm.
So that gets around this whole debacle. Laws that were passed, the executive streams the game when implementing those laws. Period.
Yeah.
The Constitution, in my opinion.
That
Or
is
someone,
kind of
or a
pigeonholing
designator.
themselves, removing a lot of flexibility, in my opinion. But good work, I guess. I'm still kind of leaning espresso system right now, since I'll give up not having provincial because it seems like everyone wants to have provincial. I'm definitely just because like mathematically it feels better to me, gives better representation, it's easier.
No, that's fine. I'm for espresso's provincials. Honestly, at this point, as long as we have good representation and sort of the head of state plus a bicameral legislature, I'm pretty happy with that. But even if it's not a bicameral legislature, I'm okay with it as well.
I would like to bring up another topic, if that's all right.
Please do.
Yeah, what about the number of positions we want in government? Should it be kept the same, or should we increase or lower it for this mark compared to the last?
Well, with a lot of these provincial systems, it seems like dynamic based off how many people we have, which I think is the best way, no matter what.
I think our minimums should be small and it should scale.
Yeah.
Like 10-20% of the citizenry having a position, or what would you estimate?
Right. If you have a legislature, so if a unicameral legislature, I'd say about 5 people. A single head of government, that's 6, plus a 3 to 5 man Supreme Court, so that's another. That's 9, right? So 9 people minimum in government. The bicameral legislature would put that number to 10. So 9 to 10 people in government minimum. If we can't support those numbers, then maybe Democraciv shouldn't be around, right?
Yeah.
So, how is this those systems discussed now? How are they going to keep new players busy with anything to do, basically? Or are they just voting once a month like they have
I
before?
think it's gonna have to be slightly out of game things. If we have a healthy system of, press, a lot of press, just like show that the community's not just like sitting around waiting for the next session or legislative session. I think that's gonna be like one of the first steps we have to take to maintain people.
I think 2 things. I agree with you, Wes. We need to have sort of a robust, extra governmental,
Yeah.
papers. We can have maybe a university again that can deal with all sorts of different topics.
I think the videos that have been coming out recently from DNN are like a great step because papers take a lot of effort to read and you kind of have to have some knowledge. The video, easier medium to do stuff.
The second point is, this ties back to sort of my philosophy on how I designed everything with is just a bigger legislature, right? Lets people having to schedule. I don't know. I personally think that we can find a system where we don't have to have legislative sessions and things kind of just run on a, I know it's difficult to conceptualize, so I won't get into it, but
Do anyone have... Yeah, go on.
What were you about to say, RB?
Yeah, you go on.
Oh no, I didn't have a point.
Yeah, I was about to ask if there isn't a stats on how many legislators out of the whole branch actually propose as laws, write them, and so on. Because I think there is a number of people who get elected to the legislature and then just votes and doesn't do the more in-depth.
I think that's totally fine, and I think one way to make that even better is going to be giving them powers, because then you don't have. Not everyone's a bureaucrat. Not everyone wants to be. A lot of people don't. The current system favors a bureaucrat because it's just writing laws. But if you have in-game decisions you're making, you can just be good at the game, or you have strong opinions or whatever.
Right.
So
absolutely,
it would give legislators more things to do. They had that availability last March, but they never really used it. Some of it was shot down for sure, but still.
And that's why we make it so that the executive has to operate within what the legislature kind of wants them to do.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of, in order to actually play the game, is sort of required to sit down and make those decisions.
This still does require a legislature who will actually, tell the ministry what to do sometimes, unlike last legislature.
But I think that's to incentivizing them to do that without feeling like they right? Feeling like the ministry is just going to try to find loopholes and undercut them in some way.
Yeah, I think that is a valid idea, but I would like more to focus on getting those people who doesn't like the bureaucracy and just votes and have them as lower roles instead, like governors or
there's no reason they shouldn't.
Councillors.
A legislature is a pretty base level role, and I think it can be a lot of different things. You can be a bureaucrat, but you don't need 20 bureaucrats. Probably need like 1 or 2 per party, probably. It's not an issue that people aren't bureaucrats or are just doing in-game stuff in the legislature. They could just join one committee, and that's all they do. But they're contributing something. They don't necessarily have to contribute anything. As long as they're having fun and they're staying, that's a win. But we do want to give them the options to have fun subsequently. We shouldn't just have one thing.
I just think we should get the less active legislators into less active roles instead, and those people who want to be more active.
A legislature is a really low activity role. You vote once a week.
Yeah, but I think we should change that, and the less active branches should be governors and so on.
I think it should be the onus of the legislature.
Yeah, it just has like a slight tinge of elitism, even. Just like if you're new and you're not making new laws, there's nothing wrong with that, and if we punish that, that's bad.
I also wouldn't blame the legislators themselves. I'd actually blame the session system. I think the fact that not necessarily just the session system, but sort of the way the legislature operates, I think ties into a lot of how legislators.
We should go back to early Mark II live session. That's my take.
That's even worse.
Nope, it was the best system. It was so fun. Anyone could have fun in that. It was a hell on earth, but it was fun.
Except for anybody who couldn't show up.
That makes the legislature feel more about the ministry. They understand the struggle of live session. Trying to do shit in voice chat.
Yeah, but anyway, my point is I think that the way the legislature operates is flawed, and it incentivizes legislators to behave in a certain way. I don't think it's necessarily that legislators are lazy. Some are, but I think there are ways to institutionally get around some of those issues. Implemented, or weren't implemented before.
I just think there could be other roles that would be more suiting to those less active people. That's just my point.
I think the role can easily be suitable. I mean, like, you don't have to be super active to be suited to be a legislator. That's just not a thing. I don't know.
Fee, you haven't talked in a while. What do you think?
Yeah, I mostly agree with reducing the pace of the game. I think that would help casual players engage, as maybe not direct participation in the government, but they'll have a lot of spaces to voice their opinion. So I think that's a good thing.
I think casual players, like if you're just looking, like, what exactly would you define a casual player as first? I'm kind of thinking lurker, but
yeah, lurker basically.
Yeah, like a lurker, I think they just watch the game from a distance and vote sometimes. Like they're not going to do more. Maybe they just don't have enough time, or they aren't that interested. They kind of like the experiment or whatever. That's kind of what the lurker is. And I don't think just slowing it down is going to necessarily bring in the lurkers, but it could bring in like people transitioning from lurker to active person, or just like semi-active.
Well, I think maybe not every lurker will get drawn by that system, but I think just being able to jump in chat and giving your opinion of something that's happening. I mean, it's not like we had a session last weekend and we built this many things and researched this and that. So there's no really jumping into the game if the pace is slower. Maybe there's just one or two issues going on right now. So I think, of course, it's not the perfect system that's going to draw everyone and everyone's suddenly gonna become active. But I think it will help.
Mm-hmm. I'll agree with that.
I also have a comment on the governor system that you were discussing earlier. I think one way to handle it is keeping it flexible, leaving it up to the legislature which provinces get a governor. If you have like a province that is one city that produces something every 20 turns, you obviously don't need a governor for that city. But if you have a city that has transitioned to building something every 5-7 turns, maybe you do want to delegate that power. So I don't think provinces should have governors by default, but it's definitely a system that could be explored while the game evolves.
Well, I think the slow cities, at least later on, slow cities can just get tacked onto an existing state. That'd be a simple solution to it. And then once they grow, maybe they can split with another one or two and become.
I agree with you,
That's how I would envision it.
Tiberius. I think that we shouldn't have governors as a mission. I think that governors can become naturally instituted over time.
Well, I think that's kind of what
That the legislature.
progressive system accomplishes by.
It's mine as well. So
yeah. Okay. So you establish a state when people want to be.
except that the governor of that state isn't like in the Constitution. It would be legislature going, okay, what kind of powers do we want to delegate to the provinces? Okay, let's make it so that they can elect governors, and the governors have control over these aspects of the game. Or if it's just the legislature has that power originally. More flexible as well. Sort of mirroring what Tiberius just said. Oh, great organizer, still alive and well.
I am alive and well. I'm just had an idea on something to throw together, and okay. I was just throwing together a demonstration of a citizenship moving form. Kind of show how I'd like that to work. I'm going to go ahead and post that in the chat, but this is what I'd like to see out of the citizenship system. And so it's a simple form. I'm actually going to make this make these required, but not. The pin, of course, is not active. Nothing's hooked up to anything, but the way this form is, it will automatically list only the cities that are active, and as soon as we add a new city or a new state, it's going to be added to the list. So.
Okay.
So you
had a drop down menu for names. Was that intentional?
Yep.
Like
that's something I've been experimenting with. Is
that makes sense to me, because then presumably you'd have a separate.
It'll pull the names out of the registry, and that way there's no typos.
Okay.
And there's no I forgot my what name I registered under and stuff. It's just gonna pull the names from there, It'll check to make sure the pin matches the same one you put on the registration form. That's assuming I have anything to do with the registry. But this is something I'm testing out.
Coffee, if you want anything to do with the registry, we're obligated to give it to you. You keep building them for us.
Well, I had nothing to do with Mark IV.
No.
As I'm pretty sure
That's a...
Mark IV used my design, but it was
So,
it was a
how
knockoff.
would you... Yeah. How would you do making new states? Because you have to have 5 people to move there first
Right.
to get governor representation.
Okay, so you would have to start a petition, and you would probably do that by Reddit post.
Okay.
And you'd have to hit a certain threshold. We haven't figured out how petitions work, but
Presumably like 5.
let's say you have the petitions, you present that to whoever does the elections and say, hey, put this on the ballot. Enough people want
Oh,
this.
so people would vote if a state is made?
People would have to vote for it. Because it's kind of a big change. It affects the political composition. But the only votes that are counted are residents of that area.
So, well, that would be for a state like split or a city splitting off from like an existing state. If we settle new city, and it's like on 3 different continents away, and no one's there, there's no real area to it. You would get 5 people to say I want to move there, and then they get it.
Well, the citizenship form that I just showed that would be available, and it would have a cutoff date, and whatever the last, basically you could move at any time. So if people decide, hey, I want to move there, they just move there, and then and that's what it will be based on.
2
Would your
things.
system be fine with people spamming moving?
Actually, yes, it would. It would just go with the last one they put in. There is, of course, a limit. If I get like 1,000 submissions all at once, it might screw things up. Just because you're spamming the system more than it was designed to. These are spreadsheets. They're not supposed to be used as databases, but I do it anyway.
Yeah.
Do you see anything wrong with to a specific state or province, voting there, then immediately moving back to their old province?
That's why there's a cutoff date.
So it'd be like a week before elections?
Right. And that cutoff date will be for all of the, so far as all elections are concerned, finding out what the population is and the representation and counting where your vote occurs is all based on the cutoff date. The downside
So here's just like another cool hypothetical.
Okay.
If an election just happened, and let's say I voted in California.
Right.
But then the state of Idaho is founded.
There is no state of
and
Idaho.
I move there. Of course not. This is why it's the hypothetical. Right. So I move to this hypothetical Idaho. And would there be a special election if 5 people already moved there? Or would it just wait till the next election?
It would wait till the next election.
Okay, that's my...
Yeah. And
because if there's a special election, would I get to vote in both California and Idaho?
No, you get... no, your ballot will only be counted for the last residence at the... I just like to think of it as the census, but as the cutoff date. That's where your vote is counted.
Okay.
You
So
think
then
of
when you have your ballot, there would be... The first page would be like, what state are you in?
I would... yeah.
So if someone lies there, or they just get it wrong on accident?
Because I'm not sure if I'm going to be involved in the elections, but if I were running it, I'm trying to think of ideas on that. One is that you choose your state, and if it doesn't match your citizenship, well, it's...
Your vote doesn't count? Are you contacted?
Your local vote doesn't count, and yeah, you might be contacted.
Yeah.
That's always kind of been the policy, is if unless we get a bunch of mistakes, trying to contact a person to clarify any errors on the ballot.
Do you know? Yeah, like if you mess up your pin by like 1 digit or
Yeah,
something.
it's like we'd always
Are you
contact
contacted
with
about that?
that.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's always been our policy. Is if your pin was like 1 digit off, or a lot of times I'll see people had almost the right number, but not quite. If it was something like that, I'd validate it, because the
Yeah.
chances of someone guessing almost the right pin, not that likely. But we'd also try and PM you and talk to you and say, hey, did you actually vote here?
Yeah. I like the pin system more than the I voted system that places like Hearts of Democracy use.
Well, there is absolutely no...
honestly, on preference, but...
you can make as
But
many
this gives more
Reddit
reason.
accounts as you want very quickly.
Yeah.
If I wanted to spam I voted on new fake accounts, it's a little harder with Google, because you'd have to be making a bunch of Google accounts. It's a little bit
That's
more
not
of a process.
extremely hard.
Not
You could
that
still get
hard,
like 8.
but
That's
it's a little more difficult.
If you had 8 emails, that would be fine.
Yeah.
But
it becomes a bit of a pain that when we tie all the forms to registration through Google, it's not impossible. Someone who wants to put in the effort could definitely do voter fraud, but it's much easier to do something on Reddit to just say I voted. One thing
I remember early Mark IV, there was a lot of new accounts voting, and we had an I voted system for a small while because we hadn't got pins in. I think, but there's a lot of new accounts. I think people
had a lot of. I've had one person actually request we switch to a password system instead, and the only issue I have with this is just because I know people. People reuse the same password constantly because they can't remember it.
I've used the same. My PIN is my phone password, and I've used it for everything.
I have a single, I have a Democraciv PIN and a Democraciv password that are just specifically Democraciv stuff. But yeah, it's just so.
Do you have?
That.
This is just me asking you questions about the PIN system.
Yeah.
Do you have people with this identical pins?
Yes, that does happen.
What do you do then? Is it always checked along with the name?
The pin and the name are compared. They're paired together. So yeah, it checks the username, then checks the pin to make sure they both match. Otherwise, it gives an error and flags the ballot and doesn't put it in the count until it's double checked. I don't know about Mark IV, but there's always a manual override on my systems, so that if something is clearly valid, but the system is saying it's not, I can double check it and say, yeah, that's valid. I don't ever believe in automated systems without a manual override.
Yeah, I will have to leave now. So.
All right.
Thanks.
Well,
RB.
All right. Well, I guess do we want to close this for today? Call it an evening.
Sure.
All right.
I guess.
Well, meeting is adjourned.
I just want to ask something.
Okay. Meeting is not adjourned.
No, quick question. What's the following step you're planning to take? Is there anything that any progress in the constitution that we're gonna make anytime soon?
I've started taking Masenko's constitution. I started putting some notes on it and applying some of my own ideas. And I want to start taking pieces of this and putting it on the draft. I was going to do that this morning, but I didn't get a chance. But that's the idea. Is when we have the next meeting, we will have the beginnings of a draft, and the main things that need ironed out, other than some stuff like whether we even keep the Bill of Rights is going to be under review, whether we put in the article on provinces. With Masenko and I, we were writing a provincial section. His was like three entries, and mine is 7. So we need to decide: are we going to make this provincial article? With the judicial branch, it seems like the judicial branch doesn't need a lot of work, really. The executive and legislative branches are what really need to be worked on. So I'm just going to put, copy these onto the Constitution so we can really pick them apart and decide: are we doing a bicameral or how we're going to do this. So we're going to have a Constitution to actually be editing on Tuesday.
All right. Thanks.
All right, so we'll close out now. Thanks for participating. And if you have a preferred Civ choice, get out there and campaign, because the Civ vote opens tomorrow morning. I am testing out a new automation thing, so it should open and close on its own. But I will be monitoring it to make sure that nothing weird happens. But if this
Canada.
If this system works, then we could actually set a single ballot for all elections that will open and lock itself without our intervention.
It's awesome, but also hashtag maple syrup and hockey and Mounties. Thank you very much.
But they're not even communist.